Here you dive deep into a memoir that's making waves.
Okay.
It's called The House of My Mother by Shari Franke.
Right.
We're going to unpack Shari's journey, from growing up on a hugely popular YouTube channel and then escaping a controlling environment and finally fighting for her siblings' well-being.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a wild ride, so
Yeah.
buckle up.
I bet. What strikes me about this memoir is how it gives you this look, like behind the curtain of this seemingly perfect YouTube family.
Yeah.
And it reveals a much darker reality. It makes you think about like the difference between the image people project online versus what's actually going on.
Behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Exactly. And let's start with Shari's childhood. She grew up in Springville, Utah,
Okay.
in a strict conservative LDS family. And it seems like faith was just woven into every aspect of their lives.
Yeah.
Her mom, Ruby Franke, is portrayed as a woman who always wanted to be a mother above all else.
Yeah, and it's interesting how Shari describes the family dynamics. Her dad, Kevin, comes across as kind and supportive of Ruby, but also sort of passive, in the face of her strong personality. Almost like he was playing a supporting role.
To Ruby's lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does kind of sound like Ruby was very much in charge.
Yeah.
From like intense piano lessons to, with physical punishments if Shari messed up, to like these marathon cleaning sessions with all the kids.
Oh, God.
It definitely paints a picture of a very highly controlled environment.
And what's concerning is how early on Shari expresses, feelings of disconnect from her mother.
Oh.
She writes about having nightmares, feeling unloved, and experiencing constant anxiety.
Oh, wow.
It's like her childhood innocence was snatched away very early.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like Ruby's parenting style, however well-intentioned it might have been,
Yeah.
created this atmosphere where the kids felt pressure to perform and meet her expectations rather than just like be kids.
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of upbringing could have lasting psychological effects?
Yeah, absolutely. When children grow up in an environment where their needs and feelings aren't consistently validated, it can lead to a sense of insecurity, low self-esteem, and difficulty forming healthy relationships.
Right.
They may also develop coping mechanisms,
Oh, okay.
like people-pleasing or becoming overly self-reliant to navigate that kind of emotional terrain.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Religion also played a big role in our lives, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Shari talks about her baptism at 8, learning about tithing from Kevin, and even being fascinated by the story of Joseph Smith and their family's connection to early LDS history. So faith was definitely central.
Yeah. There's this one story, though, about Ruby's early views on sex and pregnancy that really stood out to me.
Okay.
It was just described in a very clinical, almost awkward way. Like it was more of a duty to God than a natural part of life.
That's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how that kind of perspective on intimacy might have shaped Shari's understanding of relationships and her own body as she grew up.
It's almost as if these early experiences set the stage for the challenges Shari would face later on, both within her family and as she tried to, navigate the world outside their tightly controlled environment. Especially when their lives took a dramatic turn.
Oh, yeah.
At the birth of 8 passengers.
Yeah, that's when things really start to change for the Franke family.
Right.
The YouTube channel that catapulted them to online fame also brought a whole new set of pressures and complexities.
Shari talks about, the initial excitement of filming their everyday lives and sharing it with the world. But it quickly became clear that this wasn't just a fun family project for Ruby. She had a vision for building a brand, an empire.
And Kevin was right there beside her, documenting everything.
It's hard to imagine what it must have been like for Shari and her siblings to have, like, every moment of their lives filmed and shared with millions of strangers.
Right.
That constant scrutiny and lack of privacy could definitely take a toll. Shari describes it as feeling like her life had become a reality show with no escape from the cameras.
Wow.
She even, learned how to use the filming to her advantage.
Oh.
Like bargaining with Ruby for perks in exchange for putting on a happy face for the viewers.
Wow. But behind those smiles, it's clear that the pressure to perform and the constant filming were creating a lot of tension.
Right.
And this was happening as Shari was going through the typical ups and downs of being a teenager, dealing with crushes, friendships, and a desire for more freedom.
Yeah, there's this heartbreaking passage where she writes about falling in love with a boy named Jake.
Okay.
But their relationship was shrouded in secrecy.
Right.
And Ruby ultimately intervened cutting off Shari's contact with the outside world.
Wow.
It highlights how Ruby's control extended, like, beyond the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Into every aspect of her children's lives.
It seems like Ruby's desire for control stemmed, at least in part, from wanting to maintain this carefully crafted image of a perfect family for their online audience. But of course, that image was far from reality.
And it's around this time that Shari really starts to question her mother's love.
Yeah.
Writing in her diary about feeling disliked and worthless. It's so painful to read.
I bet.
Especially knowing what would unfold later on.
That feeling of disconnect from her mother that we saw in her childhood seems to intensify during her teenage years.
Yeah.
And it's made even more complicated by the pressures of their online fame and the constant scrutiny they were under.
So Shari starts seeing a therapist.
Okay.
Which seems like a positive step towards getting some support.
Right.
But even then she's guarded.
Yeah.
Afraid to reveal too much about what's going on at home, for fear of how Ruby might react.
It's a reminder that even seeking help can be difficult when you're trapped in a controlling environment.
Yeah.
The fear of repercussions can be paralyzing.
And this is all happening as Ruby's sisters are starting to gain popularity through their own blogs, sharing their family lives online. It almost foreshadows what Ruby would eventually do with 8 Passengers.
It's interesting how that early exposure to the world of online content creation might have influenced Ruby's vision for her own family's channel. It seems like she saw the potential to build something even bigger than what her sisters had achieved.
So we've got this backdrop of a strict religious upbringing, a controlling mother, and the growing pressure of online fame. It's a recipe for some serious tension, and that's exactly what we see unfold as Shari enters her teenage years. As Shari's navigating those turbulent teenage years, this new and disturbing figure enters the picture.
Oh, okay.
Jodi Hildebrandt.
Jodi's introduction really marks a turning point in the memoir.
Yeah.
She's described as this life coach with a pretty controversial reputation, and her influence on the Franke family, especially Ruby, becomes increasingly concerning.
It all starts with Shari's brother, Chad.
Okay.
He's, going through a typical rebellious phase, but Ruby and Kevin seem to, overreact, turning to Jodi for advice.
What's striking is how Jodi capitalized on Ruby and Kevin's anxieties and desire for control.
Right.
Instead of addressing Chad's behavior with understanding and empathy, she presents herself as having all the answers, a miracle worker who could fix him.
They were so desperate for a quick solution that they ended up sending Chad to this wilderness therapy program.
Oh, wow.
Called Anasazi, which is incredibly expensive. And from Shari's account, quite harsh.
Anasazi was part of what was known as the troubled teen industry, which has faced a lot of criticism for its methods.
Yeah.
These programs often isolate teens in remote locations, subject them to intense physical and emotional challenges, and use confrontational therapy techniques that can be quite traumatic.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what Chad went through during that time. Yeah. Especially, knowing how vulnerable teenagers can be.
Right.
And it's even more unsettling that Ruby and Kevin seem to blindly trust Jodi's advice.
Yeah.
Without, questioning whether it was truly in Chad's best interest.
Yeah. It speaks to the level of influence Jodi had over them.
Right.
She presented herself as this authority figure, someone who had all the answers,
Right.
and they were willing to follow her guidance without really considering the potential consequences.
And it didn't stop there.
Oh, no.
Ruby became completely enamored with Connections.
Right.
Jodi's life coaching program.
Oh, wow.
And even got certified as a coach herself.
Connections wasn't just, any life coaching program. It had this very specific and rigid set of principles that many former members have described as cult-like.
Yeah.
It emphasized strict obedience, isolation from outside influences, and this constant pressure to conform to Jodi's teachings.
So it sounds like it was more about control and manipulation than actually helping people improve their lives.
Exactly. And it's concerning because Ruby wasn't just participating in this program. She was actively promoting it to her followers, spreading Jodi's teachings, and encouraging them to join Connections.
Shari talks about having these weekly calls with Jodi.
Oh, wow.
Like being forced to analyze every aspect of her life through this, distorted lens.
Yeah.
And experiencing this growing sense of paranoia and self-doubt.
It sounds incredibly manipulative.
It is.
It's classic psychological manipulation. Jodi would isolate Shari from her support systems, constantly criticize her thoughts and actions.
Right.
and then offer herself as the only source of validation and approval.
It's heartbreaking, because Shari was still a teenager at this point, trying to figure out her own identity.
Yeah.
And she was being subjected to this intense psychological pressure.
And it's important to remember that Ruby was not only participating in this herself,
Right.
but also perpetuating it within her own family. The environment at home became increasingly toxic, with everyone walking on eggshells, afraid to upset Ruby or Jodi.
Shari describes becoming like this preachy, judgmental version of herself.
Oh, God.
Even calling out her friends' so-called distortions, based on Jodi's teachings. It's like she was trying to prove her loyalty to Jodi.
Right.
Even if it meant, alienating people she cared about.
It's a common tactic used in cults and other manipulative groups.
Right.
They encourage members to police each other's behavior,
Yeah.
creating this atmosphere of fear and suspicion where everyone is constantly looking over their shoulder. It makes it much harder to break free because you're constantly being monitored and controlled, even by the people you're closest to.
But even amidst all this, there are, glimmers of doubt.
Okay.
Shari talks about catching Jodi in lies, questioning her motives,
Yeah.
feeling incredibly gaslighted.
It shows that Shari wasn't completely brainwashed. There was still a part of her that recognized the inconsistencies and red flags.
Right.
But it's also a testament to the insidious nature of manipulation. Even when you have doubts, it can be incredibly difficult to break free from that kind of control.
And then things escalate dramatically.
Oh, no.
Jodi moves into the Franke family home, and it turns into this bizarre, chaotic environment.
Jodi's presence in the home marked a significant shift. She wasn't just an outside influence anymore.
Right.
She was embedded in their daily lives, constantly reinforcing her teachings and exerting control over the family dynamic.
Shari talks about how they became obsessed with prepping for doomsday scenario.
Oh, gosh.
Fueled by Jodi's paranoia and fear-mongering.
It's a common tactic used by cult leaders to maintain control.
Right.
They create a sense of urgency and fear, making their followers believe that they need to stay within the group for protection and guidance.
Right.
It fosters dependence and discourages critical thinking.
And it's during this time that we see Kevin, Shari's dad, completely transform.
Oh, wow.
He becomes withdrawn, subservient,
Right.
and essentially follows Ruby and Jodi's orders without question.
It's a heartbreaking example of how emotional abuse can erode someone's sense of self. Jodi systematically chipped away at Kevin's confidence and autonomy, making him question his own judgment and rely on her for direction.
There's this chilling incident
Okay.
where Ruby loses her temper over Dwight,
Okay.
the family dog,
Ah.
refusing to have him in family photos because he's just a dog.
Oh, my gosh.
It seems like this is a small detail,
Yeah.
but it reveals so much about her dehumanizing mindset.
It speaks volumes about Ruby's skewed priorities and lack of empathy.
Right.
She was so focused on maintaining this perfect image for their online audience that she disregarded the well-being of her own pet.
Right.
It's a disturbing glimpse into her controlling, manipulative nature.
And amidst all this chaos, 8 passengers is still going strong.
Wow.
The family's making money, going on vacations.
Right.
But behind the scenes, it's a completely different story.
It highlights the stark contrast between the curated image they were presenting online
Right.
and the reality of their lives.
And then the bombshell. Kevin is asked to leave the family home.
Oh, wow.
Jodi's plan seems to be falling into place. She's gained complete control over Ruby and the family.
It's a devastating blow for Shari.
Right.
She's lost her father figure, her home life is in turmoil,
Yeah.
and she's desperately searching for a way out.
Shari's struggling to cope with the trauma she's experiencing.
Yeah.
And her relationship with Derek, the older man she's been working with,
Right.
becomes increasingly unhealthy and abusive.
It's a really dark period for Shari.
Yeah.
She's grappling with feelings of guilt, shame, and self-loathing, all while trying to make sense of the world through this warped lens that Jodi has created.
She reaches out to Kevin's parents for help,
Oh, yeah.
tries to reason with Ruby, but her pleas fall on deaf ears.
Oh, gosh.
She's trapped, and the situation seems hopeless.
It's a reminder that even when you're surrounded by people, you can still feel incredibly isolated and alone, especially when those people are unwilling or unable to see the truth.
It's incredible that Shari was able to hold on to any shred of hope during this time. But her resilience and determination are truly remarkable. It feels like things couldn't get much worse for Shari, but his story takes an even darker turn as she tries to break free from Jodi's control and, protect her younger siblings.
This final part of Shari's journey is really intense.
Yeah.
She's caught between, the trauma she's experiencing at home, the manipulative relationship she's in with Derek, and this growing awareness that something is deeply wrong with the way her family is living.
She's going off to college, trying to build a life for herself.
Okay.
But the shadows of her past, they keep following her.
Right.
She describes, moving into a mold-infested apartment.
Oh, wow.
Struggling to cope with the demands of school and feeling incredibly isolated.
It highlights the lasting impact of trauma.
Right.
Even when you're able to, physically remove yourself from a toxic environment, the emotional and psychological scars can linger for years.
And her relationship with Derek, it just spirals further into abuse.
Oh, gosh.
He's isolating her from her friends, belittling her accomplishments.
Right.
And using, gaslighting tactics to make her doubt her own sanity.
It's a classic pattern of abuse. Derek preys on Shari's vulnerability, exploiting her need for support and affection.
Right.
While simultaneously, undermining her self-esteem and sense of agency.
It's heartbreaking because Shari is seeking connection and intimacy.
Yeah.
But she's finding it in all the wrong places. She's surrounded by people who are taking advantage of her, and she's struggling to break free.
And it's important to remember that Shari is still, deeply enmeshed in the ideology of connections.
Right.
She's struggling with guilt and shame, questioning her own worth, and trying to make sense of the world through this distorted lens that Jodi has created.
So even as she's recognizing the abuse in her relationship with Derek, it's difficult for her to fully grasp the extent of the manipulation she's experiencing from both Jodi and her own mother. It's like she's trapped in this web of control, unable to see a clear path out.
And it's during this time that Shari has this chance encounter with her brother Chad.
Okay.
But instead of the, reunion she'd hoped for, she's met with anger and denial. He's still under Ruby and Jodi's influence and refuses to acknowledge the harm they're inflicting.
That must have been so devastating for her.
Absolutely. It's a devastating blow for Shari.
Right.
She's lost her brother. Her home life is in turmoil.
Right.
And she's watching her younger siblings suffer under Ruby's increasingly erratic and controlling behavior. It seems like she's reached her breaking point.
So what does she do?
That's when Shari takes a bold, incredibly risky step.
Okay.
She calls the police.
It's a pivotal moment in the memoir.
For sure.
She's finally acknowledging the severity of the situation and taking action to protect her siblings, even though it means, potentially facing backlash from her family and the online community that has followed their lives for years.
It takes immense courage to speak out against abuse, especially when it involves people you love. But Shari's desperation to protect her siblings outweighs her fear.
So she reports the abuse, but the system fails her. The authorities don't take her seriously, claiming there isn't enough evidence to, intervene.
Oh, wow.
She's left feeling powerless and betrayed by the very people who are supposed to protect vulnerable children.
It's a frustrating reality for many survivors of abuse.
Right.
The burden of proof often falls on the victim, and even when they gather the courage to speak out, they may face disbelief, skepticism, or even accusations of lying.
But Shari doesn't give up.
Good for her.
She continues to document the abuse, gather evidence, and speak out against her mother's actions, even though it means, risking further alienation from her family.
It's a testament to her resilience and determination. She's not going to let fear or silence prevent her from fighting for justice.
And then finally, a breakthrough. Ruby and Jodi are arrested on charges of aggravated child abuse.
Wow.
It's a moment of validation for Shari.
Right.
But it's also incredibly bittersweet.
For sure. There's this sense of relief that her siblings are finally safe.
Right.
But it's mixed with the pain of seeing her own mother face the consequences of her actions.
It's a complex emotional landscape that Shari navigates with remarkable honesty and vulnerability.
It's fascinating how Ruby reacts to the arrest.
Right.
At first, she denies everything, then tries to shift the blame onto Jodi, and ultimately adopts this persona of humility and remorse, hoping for leniency from the court.
It's a classic narcissistic tactic, trying to manipulate the narrative to gain sympathy and avoid accountability. But Shari sees through the facade,
Right.
recognizing that Ruby is still more concerned with protecting her own image
Yeah.
than acknowledging the harm she's caused.
Yeah.
Shari attends Ruby's sentencing hearing with her brother Chad, who by this point has started to, break free from Jodi's influence and recognize the abuse he experienced.
It's a powerful moment of solidarity
Yeah.
as they both confront the woman who caused them so much pain.
Ruby, even in the face of, overwhelming evidence,
Yeah.
continues to play the victim, comparing herself to Jesus on the cross and portraying herself as a martyr. It's a chilling display of delusion and a refusal to take responsibility.
It underscores the deeply ingrained nature of her manipulative tendencies.
Yeah.
Even in the face of legal consequences, she's unwilling to acknowledge the harm she's inflicted,
Right.
choosing instead to cling to this distorted version of reality where she's the innocent victim.
In the aftermath of the arrest, Shari takes an active role in exposing the truth about her mother's actions.
Good.
She compiles years of footage from 8 passengers' videos, highlighting the emotional abuse, manipulation, and controlling behavior that was often, hidden behind those seemingly perfect family moments.
It's a powerful act of defiance. Shari uses the platform that Ruby built to expose her hypocrisy and hold her accountable for the harm she caused.
But Shari's journey doesn't end there. She attends Jodi's trial, seeking closure and supporting her siblings.
Yeah.
And receives a letter from Ruby in prison
Oh, wow.
that reveals just how deep Ruby's delusion runs. She continues to blame others, refusing to take any responsibility for her actions.
It's a reminder that healing from trauma is this long and ongoing process, and that even when abusers are brought to justice, the scars they leave behind can linger for years.
Throughout all of this, Shari finds solace in unexpected places. She adopts a cat named Muppet, who brings joy and chaos into her life, and reconnects with Kevin's parents,
Okay.
finding a sense of family and support that she's been craving for so long.
It highlights the importance of finding healthy connections and building a support system outside of the toxic environment you've escaped.
Right.
It's about, reclaiming your sense of self and finding sources of love and stability that can nurture your healing.
So as we reach the end of this incredibly complex and emotionally charged deep dive into Shari Franke's memoir, what are your biggest takeaways?
For me, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition,
Right.
the dark side of online fame, and the insidious nature of emotional abuse.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even those who present a perfect image to the world can be hiding deep secrets
Right.
and inflicting immense harm on those closest to them.
It's a stark reminder that we should never underestimate the power of manipulation,
Right.
the importance of critical thinking, and the courage it takes to speak out against abuse, even when it feels like the world is against you.
But it's also a story of resilience.
Right.
The indomitable spirit of a young woman who endured unimaginable trauma, but ultimately found her voice and fought for justice for herself and her siblings.
Shari's journey is a testament to the enduring power of hope, the importance of seeking support, and the possibility of healing, even from the deepest wounds. And it leaves us with a lot to ponder about the ethics of family vlogging,
Right.
the complexities of child exploitation, and the responsibility we all have to protect the vulnerable.
I think it's a story that will stay with listeners long after they finish this deep dive, and it hopefully encourages them to be more mindful of the content they consume, the influencers they follow,
Right.
and the potential for harm that can lurk beneath the surface of a, carefully curated online persona.
Thank you for joining me for this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.